Ambassador Pollitt, welcome to Nepali Times studio.
Thank you for having me.
So, starting off, can you tell us something about your personal journey as a diplomat and the kind of challenges you faced to reach this point?
Sure. So I've been in what is now the Foreign Commonwealth and Development Office for about 18 years, and I don't think when I started I ever envisaged being an ambassador, but it seemed like an interesting career in my early 20s and one which had an international outlook which interested me. I think along the way I have taken jobs that look interesting as they have come up, and over time they have led me to be here in Nepal as ambassador, which is a huge privilege, and despite the challenges of coronavirus, which has dominated most of my time here so far, it's been a fascinating time, and I'm hoping to have many more interesting chances to explore the country over the next year or two.
And Ambassador, you have worked quite a bit in women empowerment. So what are the elements that contribute to women empowerment and ensure that we have strong women leaders tomorrow?
If girls don't have a good education, then they're never going to have the confidence and the opportunities to make their own decisions and make their own choices, and have the same opportunities that their brothers or their male counterparts might have. So we're doing a lot of work in the field of education, and I think that is the foundation for all of women's empowerment. But then building on that, there's a range of other things which matter, and some of those are about making sure that young women have opportunities into the employment sector, and breaking down some of those gender stereotypes that might put women off going into certain kinds of employment. So we're supporting a range of work where we are trying to open up opportunities for women in sectors where they normally wouldn't perhaps think to work, whether that's an instructor or a manager, and I think that's critical because then you see role models and women can see themselves and follow others in those roles.
Also, in regards to coronavirus crisis, we have seen that countries led by women have done better in terms of dealing with the crisis, and New Zealand and Finland comes to mind. So what is it that women bring to governance that makes them more effective leaders?
Women bring a different perspective, and one that has been built on their own experience, which in many cases has to overcome challenges that perhaps others don't face. Now that's not to say that women leaders are better, it's just to say that you need both, and you need those different perspectives, and the way they interact with other leaders around them and the teams that they manage can sometimes find different ways through problems, and I think that balance, that range of perspectives is really important.
So how is the UK working on gender equity with development partners here in Nepal?
So we actually support gender equality through 90% of all the money we spend on programs here in Nepal. So it's not the case that we have a large range of specific programs focused on supporting gender, but rather that across all of our programs we look at how we support gender through those. So for example, we had a rural access program which was about building roads up in Jumla Mugu, and on that program 50% of the people who worked on the road were women, and when we spoke to those women afterwards, 90% of them said that it was the first opportunity they'd had for paid employment. But alongside that, we do a lot of work focused on girls' education in particular, which, as I talked about, for me is the foundation of women's empowerment. And I think here in Nepal, as in many developing countries, girls are often left behind traditionally in education. So supporting girls, and in particular marginalised girls who might not otherwise have access to that education, is a big focus of what we do here too. Violence against women and girls. Here in Nepal, this is another area where we are doing our best to support, both through awareness raising programmes, whether that's with the police who might have to tackle and investigate some of these cases, whether that's with hospitals where they may have girls and women come into them as victims of violence or abuse. And I think just having conversations publicly about what is acceptable and what's not acceptable is really important. And over time, I think we have seen, so we monitor some of the data on this through surveys as to whether men and women think it's acceptable, for example, to hit their wife. And we have seen over time the number of people who think that's okay fall. And that's really encouraging. So I think there is lots that we can do.
And moving on to climate, do you think the coronavirus crisis has distracted governments around the world as they prepare for the climate summit in November?
So I think it's definitely the case that governments are having to look at both crises together. But speaking for the British government, I think it's very clear that climate is absolutely still a top priority, and there is the capacity and the political will to look at both of those. I think, as we've seen, coronavirus hits countries in waves. So it isn't the case that for the last 15 months all countries have been in a kind of crisis stage, but clearly we see that happening in some countries at some times. So that does leave capacity, I think, and you see just in the growing level of awareness around climate, how much more it's on people's minds than even maybe 2 or 3 years ago. So I think it's important that we all play our part to keep the climate crisis on the top of the agenda, whilst also recognising that governments, of course, are having to manage some pretty challenging times from a health perspective.
And earlier this year, COP26 President Alok Sharma was here in Nepal.
Yeah.
What was the main message that he took from here?
So I think the thing that he was most struck by was the vulnerability of Nepal, and in particular the mountainous areas of Nepal, to climate. We did manage to get him to Jomsom, and he spoke to local people there, and he heard them talk about the lack of snow, the lack of water, and how that was affecting their lives, and how some of them had to migrate. And that made a big impact on him, and he's talked about it since his visit in a variety of newspaper articles and also global forums, which I think for Nepal is really helpful. One of the things that the UK wants to try and do to support Nepal is to raise Nepal's voice and the issues around climate in the Himalayas and the vulnerability of countries like Nepal as we head towards COP26. So I think that his visit really helped to do that.
Definitely. So would you say that women are disproportionately more affected by the climate crisis in the Himalayas?
So I think there is good evidence that women are more affected by climate change. I think there's a range of reasons for that. We know that over 60% of women in Nepal work in agriculture, which is a field which is particularly climate vulnerable to the weather, whether that's floods or drought. And I think that we also know that the roles that women often perform in society here, particularly in rural areas, are also the roles which are most affected by climate. But the reverse is also true. So we also know that if we can support Nepal to move towards clean energy, then there will be less need for women to gather firewood. They won't be as affected by cooking in the home, where smoke can be damaging for the health. As clean and more available energy opens up, it provides better technology that women will be able to access, so that as they get better electricity and internet in their homes, perhaps there will be opportunities in those areas to get employment and to do further education. I think whilst climate change is affecting them, we can also say that the more we can do to support Nepal through a green recovery into green growth, and we should see a positive effect for women as well.
So coming back to COVID-19 crisis, UK has been supporting the COVAX initiative, and when do you expect the rest of the doses to arrive in Nepal?
So I don't know what the latest prediction is on the next set of doses arriving from COVAX, but I do know that there is a lot of work going on globally to ease the pressure on the supply of the vaccines, because as you know, the problem is not funding, the problem is the supply of vaccines globally. And there are conversations which we are a leading part of in the WHO in Geneva about how to open up that manufacturing process, how to manufacture in more countries, how to share some of the knowledge that the existing pharmaceuticals have in vaccine development, in order over the next few months to really expand the manufacturing capacity. So we are also supporting all of those conversations in the hope that that countries like Nepal, who haven't yet got as much vaccine as they need, will soon be able to get that.
Ambassador Pollitt, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you.